Good to see you. The first question is from a member who says, I have a real love friend who I'm wanting to learn to love better. Good goal. In the past, we've traded behaviors and I want to stop, but I want to be loving about it. I've used them all. I've run, attacked, acted like a victim, and lied. If I left one out, I used that too, which is, pretty much like the rest of us. When she called me as a wise person, I pointed out her behaviors without her asking me to, which is almost always a problem, to point out people's behaviors when they haven't asked. But if she called you to be a wise person, then she's participating in a conversation where behaviors are going to be pointed out. And I'm kind of assuming it's hard to know from your phrasing whether she called you to be a wise person or she called you because she wanted to be a wise person. But I'm assuming she called you to be one because you don't usually call somebody and say, I want to be wise. So if she called you and asked you to be a wise person, then she asked. It's implied. It's kind of like, I don't ever point out somebody's getting or protecting behaviors out in the crazy world. But if we're in a group, it's kind of an implied consent. If you're there, you asked for it. Pretty much if you're in my house, you asked for it, unless you're, fixing the refrigerator. So she asked. But just because somebody asked doesn't necessarily give you the right to tell them. Because if it's pretty obvious that they're not ready, then it's still unkind to point out what they're doing. You continued. I didn't listen well. When we're together, she offers a lot of advice and it feels to me like she wants to fix me. Listen slowly to this. I hear this a lot. I have a friend who's always trying to fix me. She can't keep offering advice unless you let her. You can stop it at any moment. So there's no way she could be imposing unless you allow it to happen. You continue. I don't believe what she's offering is really love, because if it came from you, meaning me, I would feel loved. But when she does it, I want to point out her behaviors so that I can be right. That's usually a sign that somebody isn't loving, when you become defensive when they point out your behaviors. But it's just a sign, not a certainty, because sometimes we feel defensive even when a loving person does point stuff out. I can't even count the hundreds of times when I have lovingly pointed out somebody's behaviors and they've become furious at me. We just had a real love weekend here, and there were a dozen people. And I said right at the beginning of the weekend, at some point in the weekend, if you don't feel annoyed at me, then you're probably not learning anything. So you can't take your feelings of defensiveness as proof that she's not doing it right. You continue. When we were together physically, she wants to touch me, comfort me, and I want to ask her to stop and give me space. What is a loving way to do that? In the moment, I get angry and then I don't say anything out loud because it will come out something like, get your bleeping, get your visiting hands off me. And you'd have to have been here last week to understand that. And leave me alone. So you don't ever have to become irritated. It irritates you that she touches you. It irritates you that she offers you advice. It doesn't have to, because it's your choice, always your choice. You're not trapped. So you can say, I need a little more space. I'm good right here, meaning sitting here, leaning away from her. You're never stuck. When we're trapped, we just hate it. And then our irritation starts to come up as a response to our feeling of helplessness, being trapped. You said, recently I haven't had much contact with her. She's texted me a couple of times to apologize for things that she's done in the past, and I feel annoyed at this. You're probably annoyed because you sense that she doesn't mean it, because she keeps doing them, which is one of the reasons that I say that saying I'm sorry often doesn't mean much, and in fact can become an annoyance. If you apologize, do it again, apologize, do it again. Way more effective simply to tell the truth. You said, this is somebody who's local, and I have an interest in learning to love her better, and wouldn't really want the relationship to end. So this will be great practice for you. A relationship is what you want and what the other person will accept. So do the math. It's really simple. Suppose I want a relationship with you with an emotional intensity of 7. You want a relationship with an emotional intensity of 3. So what will the relationship be? People would almost automatically go, oh, well, 7 plus 3 divided by 2. Oh, we'll average it, 5. No, in a relationship, you do not average or compromise. I don't give in and settle for a 5. You don't give in and sacrifice for a 5. No. The question is, what's the greatest offer on the table from either of us? So what is it? 3 or 7? Well, the greatest offer that's mutually acceptable to both of us is a 3. So that's the relationship. It may be less than I wanted. Too bad. I don't get to violate what you want to do. So you take the least that is acceptable to both people. Is a 5 acceptable to both? No. It violates you. At least a 3 doesn't violate anybody, even though it's less than what I want. But that's not a violation. It's just not giving me what I want. Well, too bad. I wanted a pony for Christmas under the tree and I didn't get that. But it's not a violation. So the least acceptable without forcing anybody. Or there's another choice. 0. No relationship at all. Much like I've described with couples and money or time or sex or whatever. Let's take money. Let's say I want to spend $37,000 on a car. Donna wants to spend $32,000. I'm just making stuff up. So we can get a car that is up to $32,000 because we both agree at least on that as a minimum amount. I don't get to go to 37 because then I'm spending $5,000 worth of money that is ours. I don't get to violate more than she's willing to do. It would force her. Same with sex. You do the least that is acceptable to both with no forcing. So if one person wants full-on sex and the other person wants kissing, guess what? Is this really difficult to figure out? No. Same with your relationship with this woman. So you go with whatever's the least that you both can accept and doesn't force either of you. Here's a member who says, my significant other has his grandson over to the house once a week. My dog is a German Shepherd, and he's good with the grandson, except when the grandson chases the dog through the house. And then the dog gets a little on the testy, grouchy side. When the dog is cornered, I'm afraid that it will bite the boy. I tell the boy, who is, let's see, how old? Doesn't say, but if I remember, the boy's like 5. I tell the boy that he may get bit, so don't chase the dog in the house. Well, that doesn't always work. So how do I lovingly do this so that they get used to each other without putting the dog out, which doesn't solve the problem? Sorry, this is one of those questions that's pretty funny to me. If there's an accident between the child and the dog, listen, it is never the fault of the child, ever. Just like, at least in the United States, if there's an accident between a car and a pedestrian, take a shot at whose fault it is. Pedestrians move slower. Cars move faster. Pedestrians weigh 150 to 250 pounds on the whole, and cars weigh 3,500 pounds. So, guess who has to stop? The car. Same with the child and the dog. Sure, the child might have pulled on the dog's ears or whatever, but no dog can ever be permitted around children who would even have a tendency to respond violently to pretty much anything a dog would do, like chase them, corner them, pull their ears, whatever. Period. End of discussion. I can't even tell you the disasters that I've seen working in emergency rooms with dogs and kids. If the boy is bitten, at least according to the law in this country, it will be your fault. I was once working in an emergency room many years ago when I was a resident, and a little girl came in, and the dog had bitten the girl's face, and I mean just laid this girl's face open, just torn off her upper lid, tore a big hole in her cheek. I managed to fix all that up. But I said to the grandfather, so what are you going to do with the dog? And he said, oh, he didn't mean to. The dog didn't mean to. The grandfather had no idea that was the wrong answer. So I called the police. The police came. They brought animal control. They took the dog out immediately and put the dog to sleep. Boys will be boys, little boys, 5-year-olds, and dogs will be dogs. And so you have to control the dog. You don't get to say to a 5-year-old now, don't chase the dog, because they're going to. So if you have any fear for any reason that your dog could bite the boy, you can't have the dog and the boy together ever, really, on any occasion. So the solution's really easy. There's only 3 choices I can see. Get rid of the dog, give it to somebody else, sell it, shoot it. I don't know. I love dogs, but they don't get to bite kids. Second choice, never have the boy at your house with the dog there. So for example, you could take it over to a neighbor's house. You could put it in a kennel when the kid comes over. Or third choice, never have the boy at your house. Now, this is your significant others, your partner's grandchild. So choice 3 doesn't seem to make much sense. So really only choices A and B do. You just can't have these 2 together. So your proposed solution that they get used to each other is crazy dangerous and irresponsible. Could work, but it's not worth the risk. Something to think about. It occurred to me this week, and I just couldn't resist bringing it up. Everywhere we look, there's a crumbling. I'd say it's faster than that, more like an assault on the family. It used to be the tradition that kids had 2 parents for life. Now, less than half of kids, for the first time a couple of years ago, are raised by 2 parents. Now, there's no criticism here of people who are single parents, so don't send me an email and protest. I got that. I'm saying that the traditional family is disappearing. And parents used to, in these traditional families, and many single parents still do, actually many 2-parent families don't, but it used to be taught in the old days, when it was traditional, that kids needed to work. They were taught responsibility. Now children are taught to feel entitled instead of being taught to listen, to be responsible, to be loving. Parents are taught to buy their kids with things and privileges and toys and entertainment. And their kids argue with each other instead of being loving. Somebody pointed out to me the other day something that I had not noticed, that long ago, families gathered together to work. They gathered on the farm to work. They gathered together to do projects. Extended families gathered together to put up a house. Now families gather to consume, to have parties, to eat, to do birthday presents, to go out. They spend money. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm saying that families don't as often get together to work, and that's where something's missing. My 12-year-old grandchild is going to come down in a couple weeks. And my daughter, Rachel, asked him what he enjoyed most about going down to Georgia. And he said, didn't even pause. He said, working outside with Grandpa. Oh, I was pleased. Because while he's here, we're running the chainsaw and planting grass and hauling dirt and gravel and dredging mud from the bottom of the lake and splitting wood. It's been for almost 30 years a saying in our family that work makes you happy and strong. Now, admittedly, the kids thought they scoffed at that saying when they were young, but I found it especially funny to hear them saying that exact phrase to their children now. 2 of our sons were just here, adults, And what did we do? We worked. We worked in the yard. We talked as we worked. We laughed. I must have said half a dozen times to both of them, you know, you don't have to be out here doing this. We could be inside in the air conditioning because it's getting bloody hot here in Georgia. We could be inside and air conditioned and clean and dry, and no, they wanted to be outside working. Fun is fun. But see, work can be fun too, and additionally has a binding element to it that almost nothing else does. When we consume, we're not building. When we're working, we are. There's just something about that when we're building and creating, it builds us too. Just something to think about. I had to go off on a rant. Here's a member who says, sometimes I share simple truths about myself, like how I'm lying when I clean my house before people come over to visit, because I'm afraid what they'll think if the house is a mess. Somebody was asking recently, what are some examples of these 3 to 5 lies a minute that we tell? There's one. But if I say that kind of thing, that I'm lying by cleaning up the house, to people not familiar with real love, they tend to suddenly go into how what I'm saying, my truth, doesn't apply to them. So for example, when I stated that exact truth to my mother, she went on and on about how she loves to clean, and so this doesn't apply to her. Why do people do this? Well, everybody lies, and I mean almost everybody. And we lie all day long. We lie all the time. It's our culture. It's become normalized to the point that it's just uniformly accepted to lie. So now picture this. We've got a society of liars, which is what our society is. I've had people actually say to me, well, it's our culture in our country. I've been to every continent on the globe and to now at least 50 countries, and now they lie everywhere. They lie more in some places, but now we lie all over the place. So we've got a world of lying, and then you come along and you tell the truth. You know the story of the emperor's new clothes? You know that one? You know where the emperor is very vain, and he gets progressively finer clothes, and his tailor makes them out of, wool, then cotton, then silk, and then eventually the emperor, who keeps demanding finer clothes, eventually the tailor makes him a clothing of the finest material, which really was nothing. So the emperor goes out with no clothes on. He's naked. And everybody's just going on and on about how wonderful and fine and exquisite the emperor's clothes are, when some kid in the crowd goes, Mom, he's naked. He was the one person in the crowd who wasn't afraid, who wasn't living the culture of lying. And when he told the truth, it wasn't a particularly welcome statement. Same with you. People who lie all the time are not eager to embrace the truth in the beginning. Any truth. So yours, anybody's. Because if you tell the truth, then it creates the possibility in their mind that they might be lying. Because if you tell the truth and everybody's lying, then they have to at least consider that they might be. So you really don't have two choices. Either you're right and they have to change their entire perspective, possibly change their entire lives, or they ignore you, or they assassinate you. They make you go away in some way. And same is true with all the principles of real love. If you teach them to somebody, they have to either change the way they see things, or they have to discount you, disapprove of you, make something wrong with you, or in many cases me, say it's a cult or whatever. I've heard them all. We can't just leave a thing alone if it could possibly expose our deceptions. So that's why they get upset with you and argue, and never argue. It isn't worth it. Just let people have their beliefs, no matter how silly they can be. Each week I tend to tell you a little story about Sylvie, granddaughter, who's, I just learned tomorrow, going to be 4. That just screws everything up for me. As soon as I learned the kids' ages, the grandkids, I long since can't remember my children's ages, but I was proud of the fact that I knew my grandchildren's ages, and now little Sylvie's just wrecking my life. But she's 3 today. My daughter says, I was putting the kids to bed, and when I was leaving Sylvie's room, who's 3, I told her, "Good night, sweetheart, I love you." And she replied, "Yeah, you do." I love that answer, because most children are taught to respond, "I love you too." And at 3, you don't unconditionally care about your parents' happiness, not a bit. No, you just like it that they love you. And then she continues, Jeanette does, says, as I was stroking Bruce's face, age 2, and I said, "Good night, son, I love you. I think you're a special boy." And he replied, "You're welcome." Love kids, because they don't filter it. Here's a member who says, seems to me that I've had periods of time with less peace of mind in the last several months. I've tried to explain myself, or explain this to myself. First, I'm regressing. Maybe. Maybe in given moments you stumble, but that doesn't mean because you're having moments of less peace that you're necessarily overall regressing. Now, it happens that I know the writer, and that helps, but it wouldn't really change my answer. We can be continuing to grow overall and yet simply be encountering just more difficult circumstances. So we're growing, but we have less peace because we're taking on greater burdens. So you really can't tell just because your peace of mind diminishes for a little while. One explanation you offer is, I have less trust and more fear recently. Again, for moments, sure. But again, the more loving that you become, the more capable you become of dealing with heavier loads. And in those circumstances, your faith is tested. So again, you're not going backward overall, just learning and growing and encountering bigger mountains. You said, maybe I'm less ignorant and therefore less blissful. Now, this is a really big possibility and a good observation on your part. The more that you see your unloving behaviors, the more clearly you can see that you've all along been far more unloving than you thought. So perhaps you're not going backward, just waking up and observing yourself more accurately. This is true of people in actually most fields of endeavor. When you first practice the piano, you think you can, quote, play. When you can play little songs out of the, elementary student's book. And the better you play, the more you realize that, no, last year you really couldn't play. Same with real love. You said the things I used to find peaceful, blissful, like remembering truths, music, nature, have had diminishing returns. Yeah, and again, possibly because of greater burdens, or because these things like music and nature have a more temporary effect than feeling unconditionally loved. I'm not sure. Just giving you possibilities. Notice, I'm not telling you why you're experiencing less peace. Just giving you some possibilities that you would have to consider, knowing your day-to-day experiences better than I would. One of your possibilities is that you said, I'm not as outwardly loving as I could be. Peace is not something you can have and keep, is it, though? This is still you. Is peace in doing and growing then? Is it then pain and growth interspersed with periods of peace? Peace is a natural result of knowing not that you've arrived at a certain place or ability. It's knowing you're headed in the right direction. You're in the overall flow of the universe, as well as you can be in this moment. Not where you're going to be in 10 years. You can't be where you're going to be in 10 years. It's the feeling of being in the river instead of being wedged by the flow of the river into the roots of a tree, for example, or being thrown off a waterfall. And you don't really work for peace. It just happens. It's a natural result of increasingly doing your best to follow your trust or faith. And yeah, as you grow, peace and fear would only naturally alternate. As your burdens increase, as your faith is tried, you experience things you haven't experienced before, In fact, if you only experience peace, it's a virtual certainty that you're not moving forward into unknown territory where you'd need faith. So if everything's calm in your world, you're not growing. That doesn't mean you have to be growing all the time. Heaven's sake, sometimes I just sit in a chair and do nothing because I can't take any more growth. So lack of peace could mean regression if it's prolonged, or lack of peace could mean that you're just learning and growing. You said the real love quotes that you sent me seem to have a common theme, that the following things bring peace. So 1, doing good deeds, being loving. Sure, because loving increases faith. It's active. Loving is active, and that brings peace. And loving and peace combine to increase our faith, which increases our ability to love and be peaceful. It's a cycle that's exalting rather than the cycles that we usually refer to, which are downward spirals. You said another thing that brings peace is surrendering, dropping your defenses, trusting in the love of God and others. Yep. Learning, crossing the boundaries of your comfort. Again, how can you have peace and discomfort at the same time? So you feel peace. That's a thing you feel, not a thing you work for. It's not a thing you do. That gives you the confidence to exercise faith and move forward into more discomfort, from which you grow. Then you succeed in getting more peace. It's a process that never ends. And sometimes you can alternate between peace and discomfort so quickly that it could seem like you're doing both at the same time. You're doing great. Possibly overanalyzing it, but whatever. You're moving in the right direction. And I can see it in your face. So that's really kind of the ultimate evidence. At this Real Love Weekend that we just finished, I was telling, somebody said to me, what is there about me that you see that I'm not admitting to? You want to be really careful before you ask me that question, because I'm going to tell you what I see since you asked. And I told her, and it was pretty difficult for her to hear. Very difficult. Many tears, much comforting, but she learned from it. And then she said, well, but this other person, another woman who was in the group, does many of the same things that I do, and you didn't confront her. True. In the first place, she didn't ask me, although that wouldn't have mattered much because she was in a Real Love group, so it was implied that she was asking. And second, it's all about what we can do in the moment. The first woman was more prepared to take the next step. She'd been doing Real Love for a while, for years in fact. And the second one was really pretty new at this. In fact, this was her first contact in person, in the flesh, with people in Real Love. So she was learning, she was getting it, she was connecting with people, and still had some things that she needed to work on. Well, whatever. There was a look of peace on her face that showed she was learning just about as fast as she could. Remember, peace comes not from getting things right, not from the place you are. It comes from making progress as reasonably quickly as you can. Just doing the next right thing. Here's a member, Nancy, who lives in a house with several other renters. And she writes, there's this guy, Mike, in our house who's always saying unkind things to everybody, but especially to me. So, not complicated, dear. He's bullying you. And almost without exception, bullies pick their targets to minimize their own injury. It's obvious self-interest. You see this with animals in the wild. Lions almost never attack elephants. Why? Not just because they're bigger, because they could get hurt. Even with lesser prey, lions, for example, pick the weak and the sick because there's a lesser chance that they might get hurt by, say, a lucky kick from the prey. So it's likely that Mike picks more on you because you're mild-mannered and likely to let him get away with it. You are easier prey, in short. And I know him. He weighs more than twice as much as you do. He gets a feeling of power when he says unkind things to you. Bullying is always about power. You said pretty often he does this thing where he stands over me whenever we're in the same room. Just stands there, close and over me. Doesn't feel good. That's called looming. Now he's bullying you physically. Standing over somebody in an intimidating way is physical bullying. It's really very little short of hitting you. They've actually proven with studies that children are harmed just as much by the threat of being hit as they are by being hit. So he's bullying you physically, and you don't have to put up with that. If he's bullying you emotionally, well, nobody's really going to help you except to offer you some suggestions and love you. But if he's bullying you physically, you get to tell him to back off. So the next time he's looming over you, you have your cell phone with you, you lean back and you take a picture of him looming over you. You get other people in the house to witness the fact that he does it. And then you tell him about the witnesses and the use of the photo. You tell him that you're about to do it. You tell him when you are doing it. And almost invariably, that's probably going to be enough, because bullies pick on the weak. He doesn't want there to be any consequences for his choices. Then you might warn him twice. That's up to you. The second time, tell him that if he does it again, you'll call the cops. And then if he does it again, you call the cops. No kidding. You do that. You said, in our house we have rules that say what people can and can't do for the mutual benefit of everyone. And one of those rules is that nobody brings in a pet without unanimous agreement of everybody in the house. But he ignored everybody in the house and simply brought a puppy into the house on his own. But the puppy got bigger. Surprise, that's what puppies do. And the puppy is teething. The dog nips at my feet, which is annoying and sometimes painful. And when the dog does that, Mike stands over me and says, "Good job," to the dog. Kid, it's time to take action. You know, you're being assaulted and you get to defend yourself. If a dog attacks a mailman, the United States Postal Service has a policy that the mailman gets to do pretty much whatever it takes to defend himself. Really, no matter what the mailman does. I looked it up. There was recently a Yorkshire Terrier. Now, this dog weighs 5 pounds, 2+ kilos for those of you who are challenged by the proper way of expressing weight. And this mailman picks up a rock and crushes the Yorkshire Terrier's skull. I'm not in favor of killing little dogs, so you don't need to send me any mail. But they get to defend themselves. They don't have to be bitten by big dog or little dog. Not saying it's right, I'm just saying it's commonly accepted that you get to defend yourself. In fact, in the state of Georgia, if you come in my home without permission, I can shoot you, whether you had a gun or not. So before you come in the house, knock. And I'm not suggesting that you shoot or kill the dog, but you can defend yourself. So how? Always start off small, really. So if the dog is nipping at you, have a broom. The worst you could do is hit the dog with a piece of straw. So you just use the broom to push the dog out of the way. It's harmless. It will almost certainly irritate Mike, the owner, but you get to defend yourself and push the dog off. If that doesn't work, then turn the broom around and use the broomstick and smack him on the top of the head. No dog could do this in public. If a dog bit your heels in public, the animal control people would take the dog away. Really. So first you try the broom, then the broomstick, and then you call the cops and have them bring animal control. Again, I emphasize, bullies pick on people who let them get away with it. Where you get confused is, and lots of people in real life do, is that defending yourself may not be considered loving by some people. And it turns out I've heard secondhand from some other people that some of the people that rent with you in the house have accused you of not being loving because you've tried to defend yourself. Well, tough. You don't have to live in fear. That's a rule. Here's a member that says, I've been in real love a short time. I have a grown daughter who's pregnant. She's moved back in with me while her husband is overseas. She eats all the food in the house, doesn't clean up after herself, and I feel stuck. Awful feeling, stuck or trapped. I don't know how to talk to her, and she makes it very difficult, acting like I'm attacking her if I say anything at all. I have some serious health problems, so I'm taking the next 2 months off work. I was looking forward to some physical healing and emotional relaxing at my home, but my daughter's home all the time, works irregular hours, and having her around is just going to be frustrating and not healing. So what do? I can't tell her to go stay somewhere else. Yeah, actually, you can tell her just exactly that. Here's the rule, the guiding principle, the real love principle, as opposed to answering individual problems. Never try to give more love than you have, more than you can give without crushing yourself under the burden, which includes giving your time, energy, cooperation, whatever resources you have. If you keep trying to give past what you're able, you will be crushed and you'll hurt your daughter with your resentment. So if you keep giving past what you've got, everybody loses. So yes, you can explain, you need the time to be alone. You need the time to recuperate. It's too much stress to have anybody else around. Anybody, not just her. Now, she'll probably have a victim fit, but it sounds like she's been a victim for a long time, taking advantage of your household, for example. You're not responsible for your daughter's care. Now, she's going to milk being pregnant. But that's not your responsibility. You didn't get her pregnant. It's not your job to take care of her. You can offer helping her if you want, financially, like say with finding an apartment or another place to live. But it's obvious from what you say that you can't handle having her around. You're not loving enough to have her around. And even if you were, it doesn't mean that you have to. So your daughter's not being responsible. She's using you. She expects you to simply take it, and you don't have to. Being loving does not mean giving people what they want. It means giving people what you can give without being crushed, and giving people what they need, not necessarily what they want. What she's asking you for is ease and comfort. She has a husband. There are government programs, and on and on. You are not her only source of support. Here's a member who says, I'm not accepted because I'm transgender. Oh, that is so tempting. It's just so seductive to be a victim of any kind. And we love to find a reason for our victimhood. But sweetie, this is just wrong. I know lots of transgender people. People don't fail to accept you because you're transgender. They fail to accept you because very few people are loving. So it's about people not being loving. It's not about you being transgender. People are equal opportunity haters. I used to appear on radio shows based out of Harlem, and they talked about racism. And I used to appear on the radio shows and say, there's no such thing as racism, which the hosts loved because apparently the switchboard lit up immediately. I live in the deep South, where we have shotgun racks in the back of our trucks and rebel flags, and we're famous for our history of racism. But I've been down here for almost 30 years now, and I sit around and listen to white redneck guys talk for 30 years, and I've never one time in 30 years heard white guys sit around and talk about black people. And I would tell people on the show, you flatter yourselves that white people hate you. They don't care about you. They don't think about you. They pretty much don't care about anybody. And as long as you think so, you're not identifying the real problem, which always goes back to what our parents taught us. But we like to identify something about us that makes us different, and we make it about that. So people don't accept me because I'm too short, too tall. Donna was 6 feet tall when she was 12, and she thought it was about her being tall. No, I'm sure it has an element of contribution. People don't like me because I'm too fat, because I'm too stupid. People don't like me because I'm too smart, too black, too white, because I'm an immigrant, whatever. People, on the whole, just don't know how to unconditionally love. And if somebody has some kind of difference, then it's true. They do tend to point out that difference, but that's not the real reason that they don't accept you. So what's the solution? Get loved, honey, and trust it. And quit blaming other people for not understanding you for being transgender. They have absolutely no obligation whatever to understand you and accept you. It's your responsibility to find love from the people that have it. Here's an email from a member who says, I have a friend in real love who keeps asking me probing questions about who I really am, my fears, my flaws, and so on. I tell her that I've already told all that to a couple of friends and I feel loved by them. But she tells me that I haven't told her all those truths. And I need to. I love it when people tell me what I need to do. She keeps pushing me. So what do I say? You get to choose who you tell the truth to, dear. Always. Just because somebody wants to hear the truth from you doesn't obligate you to tell it. In fact, if they push, especially if you tell them you've already told the truth about yourself, kind of sounds like they're doing it for themselves, doesn't it? And you don't have to keep telling the truth about the same things over and over again. I've had many people who told me about, say, sexual abuse when they were a kid or infidelities or whatever, and they wonder if in every group they go to, they need to go over those details. No, not really. Eventually you get to the place where you may use it as an illustration. When somebody feels really bad about cheating on their spouse, you say, oh yeah, I did that and here's how I overcame it. Great, but going over the details again and again, the idea is to be seen, accepted, and loved. And if you achieve that by telling the truth about a given thing, well then why keep repeating it? You don't need to. This member says, we recently moved and my neighbor's front yard is a gathering place. When I'm outside, we say hi, the people in the front yard and myself, but I'm afraid to walk over and visit for a few minutes. I want to hide. What if they don't want me there? Or what if I walk up and have nothing to say? I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm in school again when I didn't fit in. Honey, they're just as afraid as you are. They know less about real love than you do, but they are in a more comfortable place than you because they know each other already. They've established a comfort. They've kind of learned the rules of real love trading in that particular group, and so they've kind of settled in. So yeah, there's some disadvantage here, but look at your choices. You can stay where you are in your house and don't talk to them. Then you won't fit in. As opposed to now you're wondering if you'll fit in. You stay where you are. As it is now, you already feel like an outcast. So you can stay where you are and guarantee you feel uncomfortable, or you can take a risk and go and see what happens. Then at least there's a chance that you'll fit in. Although, yeah, there's a chance that you'll be rejected. But I can give you a suggestion. People will remember in any social situation, remember this little concept. People are going to remember one thing about you almost without fail. They're going to remember whether you were kind. Rarely, unless you're being invited as a consultant to engineer a bridge, they're going to remember if you knew what you were doing. But even then, they're going to remember if you're kind. Everybody wants to feel loved. So if you go to a place and you're kind, they're going to remember you fondly. They're going to want you back. So how do you do that? Just go over and at first you just listen. You talk about stuff that they like. Eventually they're going to invite you to say something. Just by, in every conversation, people get to a little, pause where nobody's saying anything. You watch, look at their eyes. Somebody will look at you. Just echo some interest in something that somebody just said. They talk about their kids. You say, well, that's really interesting. Where does he live? Or ask something about the kid. People love to be asked about themselves and their relatives. Eventually, you may be able to offer your own opinion or your own story. And the best way to know when that time arrives is they'll ask you. You sit at the edge of the group long enough and somebody eventually is going to say, well, what about you? There's your chance. So just go play it by ear and feel peaceful and express an interest in them, and they'll like having you over. People have asked me this question a lot of times, so I'm going to talk about it just for a second. Real love changes lives. We know that. Saves lives. And it's love that does it. It's not me, it's not you. It transforms people. But we also know that it's obvious that there are people who really succeed in real love, and there are people who don't. They don't go anywhere. They don't learn anything. Their lives don't change. So why is that? It goes by different names, but it's not complicated. Trust, mostly. Are people able to trust the love of others? And persistence. My life isn't working. There's a way out of this, and I'm going to do it. So those are the people who make it. The people who trust and the people who persist in trusting. If you get to a place there was on the weekend that I've been referring to several times, there was a woman who got to a place where telling the truth about herself became pretty difficult because the group was telling her things she wasn't really eager to hear, but she didn't quit. And so eventually she was able to hear them and take them in and learn from them. And she's a stronger person as a result. You get to a difficult place, you quit, you lose. The only people I've ever really seen fail in real love are the people who do quit. I got a call from a member who said, and I'm going to kind of summarize. He said, my wife Cindy is negative all the time. She never enjoys her day, so she's always in a crappy mood. She is not a ray of sunshine. It's killing her, it's killing me, and it's affecting our young son, so what can I do? I suggested that every time she's negative, he tell her. And then I got her on the phone so she could hear this, and she agreed to it. Because if she's been doing it long enough, there's no way she can recognize this behavior pattern that's hurting her, her husband, their marriage, and their child. Why does she not recognize it? It's a principle that I've often described as 258. If you've heard it before, you're about to hear it again. If you haven't, well then this will be new for you, won't it? Her baseline of negative, we're going to make up the numbers, but this is on a scale of 1 to 10. Let's just assume that she's negative at a 5. If she's been negative at a 5 all of her life, she will not evaluate it as a 5. So she feels it at a 2. If I were to ask her, I've been observing people who are irritable and negative for long enough that I can pretty much tell you where they are on the scale of 1 to 10. And so I'll sometimes say to them, so how angry do you think you are now? Oh, about a 2. No, a 5. But how angry does their spouse feel it? Their spouse feels it as an 8. If I swing a shovel and accidentally smack you in the face, I'm going to feel it as about a 2. It's not going to hurt me much. It's going to hurt you a lot more than it does my hand. So I feel it at a 2. You feel it as at an 8, and I probably hit you at a 5. Same thing in relationships. So I suggested that if he said it was negative, then she accepted that she was. You have to trust the person who's most affected, usually the person who's hurt because they perceive it better than the person who's stuck in their addictive behaviors. That is a good general rule. But I discovered that he played me. He manipulated what I told him and used it against her. He didn't know he was doing it, but he did. So what did he do? She called later, and I discovered that Nick, used what I said as a weapon. He didn't realize that he'd come to define negative as anything he didn't like. So if she asked him for anything, he'd say, "What, you're being negative." Remember, I'd said to him, tell her if she's being negative. And some of this, I'd swear he was doing on purpose, even though he says he doesn't realize it. But it's time to go to bed. They have a king-size bed, and he lies down, spread-eagled, smack in the middle of a king-size bed. Well, how could you not notice this? So she asked him if he'd move over. He said, "You're being negative." If she asked him to hold their crying son, because she'd been holding the kid all day long, he'd say, "You're being negative." So he was using this to control her and make his life easy. So a potentially useful tool, he was manipulating and beating her up with it. Clever, but doesn't work. And we all tend to do this kind of thing. We redefine something, and that changes everything. So he defined negative as not giving him what he wanted. Many times we define love as giving us what we want. So if somebody doesn't give us what we want, then we call them unloving, when very often what we want is demanding and unreasonable. We call it controlling when somebody doesn't give us what we want, and on and on. So we got to get our definitions right. Victimhood, pain, controlling, loving. And on the whole, we do a pretty lousy job of defining these things. Just really pretty terrible. So we define all these things correctly, and then we have to be really honest about when we're unloving. Even if you get the definitions right, people will manipulate them like this man did with his wife. And the more we tell the truth, the more we understand true principles, the more we'll be able to live by them. And it's so much easier than everything else. People sometimes say, well, real love is difficult. Sometimes, but it's not difficult compared to everything else. The more work you put into a loving relationship, eventually it becomes not work at all. We become familiar with it. So I look forward to seeing you in a week. Send me your questions. I think in a week we're going to do a little experiment where we have some people call in live on a speakerphone, so I get to ask them questions. And you get to hear them respond live, and I can respond to their questions immediately, as opposed to just doing emails or getting somebody's short question and me going on and on with a monologue. It will be more flowing. Of course, this will be entirely up to our technical staff over there. So if it doesn't go well, I had nothing to do with it. Thanks for being here. I love you. We'll see you in a week.